Convicted killer and rapist Jeremy Williams is now dead following his execution tonight at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore.
Williams had asked the state to move forward with his death sentence after pleading guilty to killing 5-year-old Kamarie Holland. What happened to this little girl is so awful. Prosecutors say Williams paid Kamarie's mother $2,500 to sexually abuse her. He took the girl to his house, raped her, and strangled her. The horrific acts all recorded. Williams was sentenced in 2024 on multiple crimes and asked for his execution to be expedited, waiving his right to appeal.
Governor Kay Ivey releasing a statement following his execution, saying in part, quote, Kamarie Holland is an innocent girl who is no longer with us, but she finally received justice tonight. May God bless little Kamarie Holland. Testimony during court proceedings revealed Williams was accused of killing his infant daughter in Alaska and sexually assaulting multiple other children. Before his death tonight, Williams thanked God for forgiving his sin.
At 6:16 p.m. on August 13, 2026, inside a hospital-style room in Atmore, Alabama, Jeremy Tremaine Williams was pronounced dead. He was strapped to a table with ordinary seatbelts. Fluorescent lights hung overhead. The room looked clinical, almost sterile. Nothing that happened inside it was. A member of the execution team read his death warrant aloud over a microphone. Then he was asked if he had any final words. He said he wanted to thank God for forgiving him. He said he'd meet him in peace. Then he said goodnight. Witnesses in the room said he rocked his head slightly, that he smiled, that he appeared to be singing to himself in the final moments before he went still. 20 minutes after the warrant was read, he was dead. Most people sentenced to die in Alabama spend years, sometimes decades, doing everything in their power to stay out of that room. Appeal after appeal, motion after motion. Williams didn't. He asked for this. He asked for it to move as fast as the law would allow. To understand why a man would beg the state to kill him, you first have to understand what he did to end up there in the first place. In December of 2021, Jeremy Williams paid a mother $2,500 for 1 hour alone with her 5-year-old daughter. By the time that hour ended, the little girl was dead. He recorded almost all of it on his phone. Her name was Kamarie Holland. This is her story, and his. If this is your first time here, this channel exists for people who want more than a headline. We go past the 10-second version of a case and into what actually happened, carefully, honestly, without flinching from the parts that matter, and without exploiting the parts that don't need to be shown. If that's the kind of story you're here for, subscribe now. This case has layers most coverage never got close to. Before any of this, Kamarie Holland was just a little girl who loved being on camera, singing, dancing, recording herself with whatever device she could get her hands on. She lived with her father, Kamarie Holland, in Phoenix City, Alabama, who had custody of her and her younger brother. Her mother, Christy Seipel, didn't have custody at the time. Kamarie was visiting her in Columbus, Georgia, the night everything changed. Her father, Kamarie Holland, has spoken about her since her death in the plainest, most devastating terms he can find. He calls her his angel. He said that her voice still comes to him without warning. In the middle of the day, in the middle of a task, in the quiet, right before sleep. He said he doesn't rest the way he used to, that some nights he simply stays up and cries, because it's easier than trying not to. She was 5. Her mother once told a reporter that Kamarie would want her old toys donated to another child in need, that she was, in her mother's own words, a very healthy child, a sweet soul. Those words would take on a very different meaning once the full truth of this case became public. We'll get there. The morning of December 13th, 2021 started. Christy Seipel, Kamarie's mother, reported her daughter missing. Her account was simple. She said she'd woken up to find the front door open and Kamarie gone. Word spread fast through Columbus, Georgia, and across the Chattahoochee Valley. A missing 5-year-old draws the kind of urgent, all-hands search that most communities hope they never have to organize. Volunteers, law enforcement, and searchers fanned out across the area, working against a clock nobody wanted to think too hard about. They didn't have to search long. That same day, Kamarie's body was found inside an abandoned house on 15th Avenue in Phoenix City, Alabama, just across the state line. Williams had previously rented and lived in that house. a direct enough connection that investigators zeroed in on him almost immediately. She had been strangled. The scene also confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. Investigators later revealed that her body had been left beneath a tarp inside the home. Within days, Williams was named the primary suspect, arrested, and charged with capital murder. Phone records undercut Sippel's story fast. She and Williams had been in contact the night before Kamarie disappeared. That single detail turned what looked like a stranger abduction into something closer to home, and much harder for either of them to explain once detectives started asking direct questions. Investigators didn't know it yet, but they were standing at the edge of something much bigger than one missing child. A pattern stretching back more than 15 years, across 2 states, involving more than one victim. That would come later. For now, all they had was a missing girl, a body under a tarp, and a property tied to a man named Tremaine Williams. Before Williams ever touched Kamarie, her own mother made it possible. Christy Sippel had an existing relationship with Tremaine Williams. According to court testimony and a warrant later obtained by reporters, Sippel agreed to something almost incomprehensible: access to her own 5-year-old daughter in exchange for money. Recent reporting around the execution, including statements from Governor Ivey's office, consistently puts the price at $2,500 for 1 hour with Kamarie. Earlier reporting from around the time of the trial mentioned a lower figure, $1,300, that was allegedly negotiated down and never paid. It's possible both numbers reflect different points in the same conversation: an opening ask, then a lower number actually agreed to. What isn't in dispute is that a price was set for access to a child, and her mother agreed to it. In the days immediately following Kamarie's death, before any of this had come to light publicly, Sippel sat down for a tearful, on-camera interview with local station WTVM. She described her daughter as the sweetest girl in the world.
I'm Kamarie Holland's mommy, and she wouldn't want nothing in the world but to donate her toys to another little child that was in need, because she was a very healthy child.
Oh, she looked like such a sweet little girl.
She was a very sweet child. She was beautiful. Sweet soul. And this is, I seen this and I touched my heart, so I stopped. That's what she was, mommy. Let's help that, mommy. She's like that. She's like that. We were at the gas station one time and we seen a family out there, and one of the little girls didn't have shoes on, and she said, "Mommy, we can help them, mommy, because I have so many pair of shoes at home, mommy. Let's give them my shoes, mommy." And of course, we gave them her shoes because she's that caring. She had a heart. She had a spirit that she's been here before, and she was a blessing. She is a blessing.
She looked into the camera and said, "I would never." She said Kamarie was her life. That same week, during the station's annual toy drive, Sippel showed up in person and donated Kamarie's belongings. At the time, it read exactly the way it was meant to: a mother too grief-stricken to keep what reminded her of the daughter she'd just lost. Watching that same interview now, knowing what would eventually come out about her role in Kamarie's death, it's almost impossible to receive it with the same innocence. Sippel was arrested roughly 2 weeks after Kamarie's death, initially on felony murder charges. Her case moved through the courts for more than 2 years. In March of 2024, she entered a guilty plea, not to murder, but to first-degree human trafficking, a Class A felony. In exchange for that plea, prosecutors dropped the murder charges against her entirely. Under the terms of her agreement, Sippel was sentenced to 20 years in prison, backdated to the start of her pre-trial detention. She was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, along with a separate $100 payment, to Alabama's Crime Victims Compensation Commission. She was required to register permanently as a sex offender upon release. And she agreed to testify against Williams, testimony that, according to reporting on the case, played a role in building the state's case against him. Because her murder charges were dropped as part of that deal, Sippel was never eligible for the death penalty Williams ultimately faced. She's currently serving her sentence, with future parole eligibility tied specifically to the financial terms of that plea. Kamarie's father addressed her mother's arrest directly, in words that have followed this case ever since. He said the pain Christie caused by ripping Kamarie out of their lives would never stop. He called her a monster. What does a fair sentence actually look like for a parent who puts a price on her own child? A jury never got to weigh that question, because the murder charge never made it to trial. Prosecutors traded it away for her cooperation. Her testimony helped convict the man who killed her daughter. Whether that trade was a reasonable use of a hard hand, or a deal that let her off lighter than what she did, is something people who followed this case still argue about. The toy drive still gets brought up in true crime circles for a reason. Maybe it was grief, genuine and messy, sitting right next to guilt she couldn't say out loud. Maybe it was a woman protecting herself, in the first fragile days of a police investigation, saying whatever would keep suspicion off her. Nobody outside Seipel knows which one it was. She's never said. When Williams was first brought in for questioning, he denied everything. Russell County District Attorney Rick Chansey has described him, in those early days, as belligerent, combative, adamant that he had nothing to do with what happened to Kamarie, even with her body found on a property directly tied to him. That denial held for roughly 2 weeks. Then, on Christmas Day, 2021, while most children his own daughter's age were unwrapping presents, Williams asked jail officials if he could speak to a lieutenant. What followed went far beyond Kamarie. Williams confessed to raping at least 2 other children. He admitted to sexually abusing a young cousin, and when investigators asked him why, he gave them an answer that stayed with everyone who's covered this case since. He said he couldn't stand to hear children cry. That's a hard enough detail to hear. What actually sealed the case in court was something else. Williams had recorded himself on his phone, both before and after Kamarie's death. Those recordings became the core evidence at trial. Kamarie Holland was not the first child in Jeremy Williams's life to die. In 2005, Williams's own infant daughter, Nadia, died in North Pole, Alaska. He was investigated at the time. He was never charged. Investigators didn't have sufficient evidence to move forward, and the case went cold. It stayed cold for nearly 2 decades. After Williams's arrest in Kamarie's case, Alaska authorities reopened the investigation into Nadia's death. This wasn't a quiet, symbolic gesture. In July of 2022, investigators from Russell County, Alabama, actually traveled to Alaska to assist directly with the reopened case, comparing evidence and testimony across a gap of almost 20 years between 2 states with no obvious connection to each other on paper. That wasn't the only thread investigators found. In October of 2022, Williams was rearraigned on an entirely separate set of charges: rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse of a child under the age of 6, tied to an earlier assault that had never been prosecuted. A judge placed a gag order on portions of the proceedings early in the case, specifically because officials believed the details involved would be extraordinarily disturbing to the public. Taken together, investigators have described Williams's known pattern of harm as stretching back roughly 15 years, from Alaska in 2005 to Georgia and Alabama in 2021, and to at least one additional case in between that took years to even surface. For most of that time, he got away with it. That's the hardest part of this whole case to sit with. This wasn't one unthinkable act in isolation. It was a pattern, more than a decade long, and nobody had enough to stop him until a 5-year-old was dead. Chansey has said as much himself, in words that are hard to read past. He believes they could have had Williams in 2005 or in 2012, and Kamarie could still be alive. Chansey has called Williams part of an elite class of criminals, his phrase, referring to how rare it is for one arrest to unravel this much buried history at once. Most offenders like him never get caught long enough for the full pattern to surface. Williams did, and only because Kamarie's case gave investigators a reason to look back. Think about the family connected to Nadia's death in North Pole. For close to 20 years, they lived with a case that had gone quiet, probably assuming it would stay that way. An arrest in Alabama, in a case they had nothing to do with, reopened a door they'd likely stopped expecting to see move at all. Williams pleaded guilty in March of 2024, but under Alabama law, A guilty plea alone isn't enough to hand down a death sentence. The case still had to go before a jury. The trial ran 3 days in a packed Russell County courtroom. The first day brought opening statements from both prosecution and defense, along with testimony from 5 separate law enforcement officials describing what they encountered at the scene on December 13, 2021. The second day brought the forensic pathologist who had conducted Kamarie's autopsy, along with several additional witnesses. WTVM, covering the trial in real time, issued a direct warning to viewers before publishing details from those 2 days, describing the testimony as graphic, vulgar, and violent enough to require genuine discretion before watching. That's not a warning local news stations issue lightly. It reflects real concern that even professionally reported, factual testimony from this specific trial could be more than an average viewer was prepared to encounter without preparation. On the third day, a survivor of a separate assault by Williams testified. Closing arguments followed from both the state and the defense. On April 12, 2024, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 4 counts of capital murder. 3 days later, Judge David Johnson formally sentenced Williams to death, stating plainly that he was bound by Alabama law to hand down the maximum available punishment given what the jury had found. Williams was sentenced separately across each of his remaining convictions as well. Life in prison for human trafficking, 20 years for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, 10 years for abuse of a corpse, a separate life sentence for knowingly recording the acts committed against Kamarie. He was also ordered to pay $90,000 to the state of Alabama. Most death row cases in Alabama drag on for decades. Williams's didn't, and that was entirely by his own choice. After sentencing, he fired his appellate attorneys and waived nearly all of his automatic appeals. Judge Johnson spent close to 10 minutes questioning him directly before he was satisfied Williams understood what he was giving up. Most people on death row spend years fighting to hold on to that same right. Williams gave it away without much of a fight at all. Governor Kay Ivey set his execution date for August 13, 2026, after the Alabama Supreme Court authorized it that June. DA Rick Chancey has pointed to a number that puts this case in perspective. Alabama currently has roughly 154 people on death row, some of them waiting close to 30 years for their appeals to finish. Williams's case took a fraction of that time. He's talked before about the kind of offenders he's dealt with over his career. People who go through with a crime but can't bring themselves to own it afterward. Williams broke that mold. He didn't just admit what he did, he asked the state to hurry up and finish it. In his final 24 hours, Williams was allowed multiple visitors. His wife, his mother, his father, his stepmother, and his brother came to see him at different points across August 12th and 13th. On the evening before his execution, he spoke by phone with his grandmother and aunt. He spent much of that last day eating vending machine snacks between meals. His final meal, on the day of the execution itself, was a Philly cheesesteak, cheddar cheese chips, M&Ms, and a soda. It's an unsettling detail. A man spending his final hours snacking and talking to family, the way anyone might spend any other day, while a countdown most of us will never have to think about ran quietly in the background. An execution can close one chapter of a case. It doesn't close all of them. Kamarie Holland, Kamarie's father, was legally barred from witnessing Williams's execution. The reason is its own separate, painful thread. In 2022, Holland was indicted on 1 count of reckless endangerment for violating a custody order that barred Sipple, who didn't have custody, from unsupervised time with Kamarie. Holland has said he allowed the visits because he wanted his kids to have as close to a normal childhood as possible, including a relationship with their mother. He didn't know she was using drugs. He said no one in that execution room could love Kamarie the way he does. DA Chancey has said his office had nothing to do with the decision. Under Alabama law, execution witnesses are approved by the state attorney general's office, not the prosecutor. Christy Seipel is still serving her 20-year sentence, with future parole eligibility tied specifically to the financial terms of her plea deal. Depending on how that plays out, she could become eligible for release years before Williams's natural life would have ended, under a normal, decades-long appeals process, a process he chose to skip entirely by asking for his own death. And the Alaska case remains open. Investigators there have spent years trying to definitively connect Williams to his infant daughter's 2005 death. Whatever he might have eventually said about Nadia or about the separate abuse case referenced in the gag order is gone now too. Those investigations have to move forward on physical evidence, testimony, and forensic work alone. His cooperation was never guaranteed, and now it's simply off the table. Kamarie Holland will likely feel something close to relief now that Williams has faced the maximum the state could give him. But relief isn't the same as closure. Seipel could be free years before Williams's natural life would have run out. Alaska's case may never get an answer. For a family carrying all three of those threads at once, an execution is significant. It's not the end of the story. Kamarie Holland was 5 years old. She should have had an entire life ahead of her. Instead, her name is now permanently tied to one of the most disturbing capital cases Alabama has seen in years, a case involving the man who killed her and the mother who made it possible. Cases like this stay with a community long after the courtroom empties and the headlines move on to the next thing. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand these stories fully, not just the version that fits in a headline, but everything underneath it, that's exactly what this channel exists for. Subscribe, because there's always another story out there that deserves to be told right. Rest easy, Kamarie.